The story began quietly, as these things often do, with an idea that seemed harmless enough. A man named Victor Kane stood in his small apartment one night, staring at the city skyline with a mind racing faster than the blinking lights outside his window. He had always been ambitious, always hungry for more, but the world had a way of reminding him that hunger didn't always lead to satisfaction. He had worked jobs that broke his back and jobs that broke his spirit, yet no matter how hard he worked, the numbers in his bank account never caught up with the dreams in his head. That night, with the city humming like a machine that never sleeps, Victor made a choice. If the world was going to play unfair, then so would he. The first step was small. He pitched an investment opportunity to 3 of his wealthier acquaintances, promising them returns that sounded too good to be true, but just believable enough to make them lean in. When their money landed in his account, he didn't invest a single cent. Instead, he spent half of it paying back an earlier debt and the other half buying himself time. Time to think, time to plan, time to grow this seed into something far bigger. And grow it did. Within months, Victor had rented an office, hired a handful of assistants, and built a website that looked professional enough to convince anyone with even a passing interest in making money. He branded his company as Kane Capital and spoke about it as if it were an unstoppable force, a financial revolution that could turn ordinary citizens into millionaires. People believed him. His voice carried the kind of confidence that made doubt seem foolish. Every time new money came in, Victor used a portion of it to pay returns to the early investors, which only strengthened his credibility. Word spread fast, and soon it wasn't just friends and acquaintances handing over cash. It was strangers, doctors, small business owners, retirees cashing out their pensions, all of them convinced they had found the golden ticket. The office buzzed with activity, phones ringing nonstop, emails pouring in. His assistants celebrated each new investment like it was a victory, never suspecting that behind closed doors Victor was juggling numbers like a man playing with fire. The scheme ballooned faster than even he had anticipated. At first, he thought he could stop whenever he wanted, shut it down, walk away, and disappear with whatever was left. But the money coming in was intoxicating. He bought a mansion in the hills, a collection of cars he barely drove, and tailored suits that made him look every bit the part of the financial genius he pretended to be. He started showing up at charity galas, shaking hands with politicians, getting his picture in magazines. People didn't just trust him now, they idolized him. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Each new investor meant more promises to keep, more payouts to cover. The numbers had stopped being abstract. They were colossal, and they scared even him. Still, Victor pushed forward, convinced he could outsmart the inevitable. He expanded into other cities, even other countries, until Kane Capital was no longer just a local phenomenon but a global sensation. It all came crashing down one morning when an investigative journalist published a story questioning the legitimacy of Kane Capital's returns. At first, Victor dismissed it, thinking his reputation could withstand the hit. But the article caught fire. Within days, regulators were knocking on his door, investors were demanding their money back, and the carefully built illusion began to unravel. Victor tried to reassure everyone that everything was fine, but his calm voice no longer worked its magic. When the arrests came, they were swift and brutal. Agents stormed his office, seizing computers and files. The world that had once worshipped him turned on him overnight. His name became synonymous with greed and betrayal. The number, $1 billion, was splashed across every news channel, a figure so large it was almost impossible to comprehend. It wasn't just a crime anymore. It was a scandal that shook the financial system. Victor sat in a holding cell that night, staring at the concrete wall as if it could somehow give him the answers he had spent his life chasing. For the first time in years, he had nothing, no money, no power, no admirers. Just silence. He thought about the people he had fooled, the lives he had ruined, the trust he had burned to the ground. For a moment, he almost felt something like remorse, but it passed quickly. By the time his trial began, the public was hungry for blood. The courtroom was packed with victims, reporters, and strangers who simply wanted to see the man who had stolen from everyone. Victor walked in wearing a suit that no longer fit him quite right, his hair thinner, his face paler. He listened as the prosecution laid out every detail of his empire of lies, each number like a nail in his coffin. When the verdict came, he barely flinched. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was long enough to ensure he would never see freedom again. As they led him away, Victor smiled, not because he was unbothered, but because in some twisted way, he believed he had beaten the system. For years, he had lived like a king on other people's money, and for him, that had been worth it. Outside, the world kept moving. Investors rebuilt their lives, and Kane Capital became a cautionary tale. But somewhere in the back of their minds, some of them couldn't help but wonder, had they really been fooled, or had they simply wanted to believe? Victor's prison cell became his new office, though there were no assistants to take his calls and no investors to charm. Days blurred together, the silence heavy and suffocating. But Victor's mind never stopped working. He began replaying every step of his scheme like a film, analyzing what had gone wrong, where he had lost control. He realized that the beginning had been his favorite part, the thrill of watching something out of nothing become an empire. It had been art to him, a masterpiece of manipulation and timing. At night, he would lie awake on the thin mattress, the sounds of the prison echoing faintly, the clang of distant doors, the murmur of other inmates. He thought about the lives on the outside that had been upended. There was the single mother who had sold her house to invest, the retiree who had trusted him with his entire life savings, the young couple who had borrowed money just to get in early. Their faces had blurred together when the money was pouring in, but now, in the quiet, they came back to him one by one. He would see them as if they were sitting across from him, staring with wide, accusing eyes. Some nights he felt a stab of guilt so sharp it made his chest ache, but it never lasted long. Guilt, he told himself, was a luxury for people who had not built kingdoms out of lies. He began to convince himself that those investors weren't victims but participants, that they had been greedy too, eager to make easy money, and that he had simply given them what they wanted until the game was over. Months passed, and Victor became a figure of fascination, even behind bars. Other inmates approached him, curious about the man who had stolen $1 billion without firing a single shot. Some wanted advice on running scams of their own, others just wanted to hear the story. Victor told it like a teacher lecturing a class, his voice steady, almost proud. He spoke about trust as if it were a currency more powerful than gold, about fear as the true engine of human behavior. The inmates listened, and soon Victor had his own little circle of followers. Outside the prison walls, documentaries and books about the scandal began to appear. His name was on every streaming service, his face on every cover. Journalists debated whether he was a sociopath or a genius. Economists analyzed Kane Capital as if it were a case study in human psychology rather than fraud. Even those who hated him couldn't look away. Victor had become larger than life, a symbol of everything broken about the financial world. One rainy afternoon, Victor received a letter. It was from one of his earliest investors, a man who had lost nearly everything. The letter was not filled with anger or demands but something colder, pity. The man wrote that Victor had been given a rare gift. People had believed in him, trusted him, followed him, and he had wasted that power on greed. "You could have built something real," the letter said. "You could have changed lives." Victor read it over and over again, and for the first time, he felt something crack inside. He had told himself for so long that he had beaten the system, that he had been the clever one, but now he wondered if maybe he had simply been small, a man who had the chance to do something great and instead chose to take everything for himself. Still, even in that moment of doubt, he felt a spark. If he ever got out, he thought, he would start again. Only this time he would be smarter, harder to catch, untouchable. The idea comforted him, let him sleep at night. In a way, the billion-dollar Ponzi scheme had never truly ended. It lived on in Victor's mind, in the stories people told about him, in the fear and fascination that his name carried. The world would recover from what he had done, but somewhere deep down, it would always wonder if another Victor Kane was out there, building something new, waiting for the right moment to take from everyone all over again.